Hi, our guest today is Milford Selectmen Chairman Brian Murray. Brian, welcome.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Kevin. Al, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
I think just we wanted to get you in as chairman, and we're a little late. You've been chairman since April, but what are your goals and objectives as chairman for the next election?
Well, as this year started, as you know, really what's taken up so much of my time has been the renovation of the youth center, the Armory. We're right into the thick of that project. It's really like a part-time job. A day doesn't go by that I don't deal with some issue on that particular thing.
Every time you open something up, you find something else wrong.
That's part of the job, I mean, there's, you take a wall down, and God knows what was done behind that wall, the ceilings.
100-year-old building, though.
That's right, that's right, that's right. So that's been a major focus of the work that I've been doing, even outside kind of the regular selectman type work.
Yeah, I remember going through that when we built the high school in Upton. The high school was a new build, which was a lot less challenging, but when we opened up the middle school, it was, every time you open up a wall, surprise, surprise.
Sure. And a building project, it is like a part-time job. I went through this with the senior center, I went through with the field, and I really kind of dreaded, another round of this. But, it just circumstances happen that, we're at where we're at. And it's gratifying, but it's a lot.
It looks like we're moving to, you have a request on the October 26th special town meeting warrant for what I would call a little more money compared to the original appropriation.
Right.
To, basically refill the contingency fund.
Yeah, to finish it off, we've got, the project had to get extended about 4 months due to all of the different things that we found. In terms of concealed mysteries, and then also stonework that needed to be done. So it pushed back the project, so we need to fund the architect for that. And then there are a couple of other little items that really should kind of go on to really, finish it off.
And people don't realize that when you open up a wall and you have to make a change, that you need a change order, that you need the architect has to design the change order, which costs money, and then you have prints that have to be generated that cost money, and then you have to
argue with the contractor over how much money.
And then the contractor says this is how much more it's going to be because it's outside the contract.
And before you even get to the contractor, we deal with the subs.
Right. Well,
so we have a masonry sub, we have an electrical sub. The general has been handling, the general finish work. But, in this particular project, the masonry subcontractor has been a big player.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big player. So that's a big part of it. And again, in this particular project, when you get behind there, not only do you have to do all of that, they have to figure out what to do.
Right.
Because as Kevin said, this is a 100-year-old plus building.
Right.
We didn't have any plans. We didn't know what was done in the past. So they're trying to figure out what was done and then what can be done to rectify the situation. It's been very interesting.
I don't think people realize that, when you... I know your architect did some exploratory engineering, but I remember on the tour I went on some of the things where you take out an old bathroom and find out all the beams were cut.
Right.
The main joists that are holding up the second floor were cut to fit in a toilet.
Right.
So now you have to reinforce those to new engineering, to the engineering specs.
The roof supports were cut at some way along the way. Somebody just unbolted a couple of roof supports that were holding the roof up. And I mean, you sit there, and if you've gone through this before, it's normal, but if you're sitting at home and you hear about this, you go, wow.
And most, and the other thing is that a new building, you always put in a 5% overage contingency. But immediately when it's a refit or something like that, they'll put anywhere from 15 to 20% contingency, and knowing that they're going to have to do that.
Right.
So even in the planning, you know that you're going to do that.
Right.
Significant difference in the planning.
Who would think there was a river running through that building?
Well, that's the other thing. Sure, you've got underground water. Although a lot of the work that we've done has really remediated the water that was penetrating the building, so we've attacked it at all different levels. And actually the water intake or income into the building now is negligible.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so the approach that the architect took was very systematic, very targeted, and knock on wood, so far it's working very well.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears from the youth center. I know you spent a majority of your time on it, but let's be candid. For as long as I can remember, you and Dino, if an issue came down to a difference of opinion, you were the two in a 2-to-1 vote. it seems lately you're the one in a 2-to-1 vote. How are you dealing with that?
Well, I mean, you know, and you're at all of our meetings, you know the board probably better than anyone, but, you know, there were quite a few significant votes that actually went 2-to-1 against me. It was not always a continuous 2-to-1 majority with Dino and I in the majority and Bill in the minority. But, you know, having said that, since the election, it is much more dramatic in the sense that there have been a handful of key votes that are 2-to-1, you know, with me being the one. You know, and I went through this in the school committee. You know, I was there for 12 years. We had shifting alliances. Sometimes you were on the 4-to-3, sometimes the 3-to-4. It really doesn't bother me. It's not anything that I think about. It doesn't change what I do.
No, you vote your conscience.
On any meeting or any particular issue, I do the best I can to be prepared on the issues that we're going to talk about. I express what I think is in the best interest of the town, what makes the most common sense. If they want to go with it, fine. If they don't want to go with it, fine. But I can go home and go to sleep at night knowing I did the best that I could.
Well, that's the one thing that, quite honestly, a lot of people don't realize, that, first of all, good debate is important. That's why it's called a democracy. Sure. I mean, that open debate, that disagreement, that's what brings the issues to the table. And I would guess that if you hear a compelling argument, that you'll rethink things. I mean, that's, you know, as an elected official, you have an obligation, I think, to tell people what you think, whether they agree with you or not.
Sure.
That's your obligation.
Sure.
And if you can convince them to change their mind, great. And if you can't, you know, you've done what you were elected to do.
One of your hallmarks is you tend to come to the meetings and you keep, I would say, very good files of you've been on what, 10, 12 years?
15 years.
15 years.
15th, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of your 15 years on the board, and when a recurring issue comes up, you normally lug in the files, open them up, and say, well, here's this memo from this, and here's this, and here's that. And I don't see the other members doing that, so at least you've researched the history of it.
For me, on any particular issue, and I was talking to somebody today about it, I can't really see the issue, if that kind of an explanation makes sense to you. I can't see it unless I see the history, you know, unless I find out as much as I can about it. You know, then I can see it clearly. And, you know, if I don't have the history, I'll go to someone that does, you know. Can you bring me up to speed? What happened on this? Where are we at? You know, so that, I mean,
how did we get to this point?
Exactly, you know, and I think that's very, very telling. Hey, I was taught by one of the best, you know, Paul Curran. You know, when I first got involved in politics, you know, Paul Curran was the one that kind of took me under his wing and, you know, was just invaluable as an educator. And Paul, as you know, had records going back to the beginning of time.
Yes.
Which the library is now trying to categorize.
Absolutely.
And do that. But his father was the longtime moderator.
Right, you know, so he did a great job, yeah. So, I mean, I keep what I have, and to me, it makes every issue clear, it puts it in perspective, and it makes me easier to, I think, advocate what I think makes the most sense.
Well, even today, I'll see things at your meeting, and I'll go, no, wait a minute, I was sitting at that meeting 3 years ago, and that's not my remembrance. Or that is my remembrance, or, you know, didn't in January somebody say, don't do that? Now you're asking why somebody didn't do it? Yeah. And I look at those issues, but I mean, you know, that's just because, you know, as reporters, if you sit at all the meetings for 7 or 8 years, you usually remember them better than the people who were in them.
It's tough because you're in the moment and things are flying around, and particularly as chairman, you're trying to coordinate debates so everybody has a fair chance to talk, and you're listening to, you know, people in front of you. So there are a lot of moving parts. But, you know, regardless of the issue or even my position, you know, I try to do the best I can to be as prepared as I can so that at least I can provide an intelligent comment, which I think is what the townspeople deserve.
Without question.
But you've also done things like on your own initiative. You brought in the police and fire chiefs for the Public First Responders Day. You, just this week, you brought in the Greenleaf Garden Club for the annual recognition. I mean, you have the power and prerogative to set things like that on the agenda.
Right, and you know, the first responder, that was brought to my attention by John Seva. You know, I didn't know about that, so he said, you know, this is what's going on. We hadn't gotten any notice, so to me it made the most sense to try to do something locally. So I reached out to the chiefs through the town administrator, said, what would you like to do? I'd love to have you in, but if you have something different. So they thought that that was a nice thing, and quite frankly, I was kind of surprised at the number of police and fire who came to the meeting. So it was very...
See, when the fire call was over, I think you had almost 30 people.
Yeah, unfortunately, we got delayed a little, and there was a fire call, and half the room cleared out. But I mean,
Well, that's not a bad thing.
that's
That's a
the
good
nature
thing.
of the job, you know. But I mean, it was nice to see them there, and it was nice to see them enjoy being recognized. And you know, you're at our annual recognition every year, which I don't know that every town does.
No, they don't.
Yeah, so we have an annual recognition for the police, for the fire. It's put on by, you know, the respective unions, and they do a great job, and it's a very moving event. So, you know, I'm glad to be part of that.
Yeah, well, let's switch gears again. We're headed into a special town meeting in October. The finances, as usual, are, compared to other towns that Al and I live in, are spectacular. You know, I sit there and I hear comments like, they have almost $6 million in free cash. You know, you could float the town of Mendon with that.
That's true.
And, you know, I just sit there and you feel good about the finances going into the town meeting?
Absolutely. And I think it's a reflection of a number of factors. I mean, I think we have very hardworking and caring department heads, so they run their department very carefully. You know, they're not overspending. I think by and large, our elected officials are all conscientious. They're working very hard. Our finance committee, the finance department. And, you know, add to that, I think the dual tax rate obviously is very, very helpful. You know, some people say it discourages business, but maybe it's the lure of 495. We certainly have not had a dearth of business in the town of Milford. That's very helpful as well. So, you know, I think it's a number of factors that come together that you know, put us at this particular spot. And then the point is, or I should say the question is, how do you react once you know what the numbers are? You know, so we try to take a conservative, measured approach to basically touch all the bases, make sure our operational needs are met, make sure we can target some very doable capital projects, and make sure we have enough to, you know, put away in a savings plan so that things that come down the line later on, you know, funds will be there. So it's been a very systematic approach.
I realize the free cash, which actually isn't free, but that's the accounting term. The free cash is unique this year for a lot of reasons. The rollback on the healthcare premiums
Right.
that were given employees, well, the town saved its larger share.
Right.
So, but you're giving, I sat back today and I realized, you have almost 5.8 million in free cash, and you're giving half of that. When you think about it, you're giving 2.8 million to lower the tax rate.
And you know, it'll probably be higher than that once the town meeting shakes out, because invariably there are going to be some other items that fall into that. You know, new growth, as you heard last night, is up about 80,000, 90,000 from what was projected.
That's good.
So that could probably go to 3 million very easily, which it's very nice to be able to do that, because it is going to keep the tax bills very reasonable. This is where...
Let me interrupt for a second. I think people need to realize, even if they get an increase, it's holding it from being a larger increase.
Exactly, exactly. This is where the dual tax rate probably hurts you a bit, because the lion's share of that buyback is going to the businesses.
Which is not a bad thing.
No, it's...
Because it will encourage business to come into the town.
Right.
So, and that's one of the things that a lot of places are suffering. But quite honestly, Milford is well-run town relative to the towns around. Generally speaking, in Massachusetts, Milford is a very well-run town and financed very well. And as a result, it's a really good place to do business.
Yes, yes.
Really good place.
I mean, it's interesting to me that you're talking about bonding $28 million for Woodland School, and the money to pay off that bond over usually a 20-year life is already there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which is...
And if it comes in, and as Zach Teller, the finance director, said last night, if it comes in at 33 million, you take it out, you've been putting it away in stabilization, you just take it out and cap the bonding at 28 million, but I don't think people realize the debt service is already budgeted for that.
Right.
Right.
Which is a very, a key.
Right.
key
Without
thing.
without raising it going
Right,
forward. It's
and
already
to be
there.
able to do that for a $60 million school without even considering
that's
any kind of a
fantastic.
debt exclusion or override is, fairly remarkable
Oh.
in this day and age.
Without question, without question. That's, it's
You know,
fantastic.
So again, I think, the approach that gets consistently taken is very important. So yes, we did have a bit of a windfall this year, but the idea is to try to best balance the realization of those funds to meet all our needs in a responsible
And
manner.
it looks like it's done very well. And I sit at the finance committee meetings, and we need to plan for that. We need to plan for this. Al Crier of the finance committee shared with me a draft copy of that 5-year capital expense plan
Right.
going forward.
Right.
And you look at it and you just see, okay, this department got funded for the last couple of years. They're not in the slot. You want to build a new field, it's $1 million, so there's $200,000 laid out for 5 years to
Sure,
get there.
sure.
And you just sit there and go, at some point on that thing, it went out 20 years.
Right, sure.
And you
sure.
said, okay, we're replacing fire truck here. And, most other towns don't have that
Yeah.
even thought of.
Well, they have the plan. The problem is
They
that
don't have the discipline.
They don't have sometimes they don't have the discipline, or they don't have the money, or whatever, so those plans get changed.
But that's cultural in Mendon's government. Now, where do you think that comes from? I've heard it said it's the immigrant culture brought over the pay cash philosophy. I don't know if that's true, but it's ingrained in the culture of Milford's government.
It's a big point, and it's something that I remember arguing strenuously for, probably going 10 years back. It seems to be more ingrained now. It always made sense to me to pay up front when you can, as opposed to bonding. And I just compare it to your credit cards at home. Do you want to carry a credit card at X amount of interest per month, or do you want to try to pay that credit card off as fast as you can? So, back about 10 years ago, it wasn't always the way. There were different schools of thought. Borrow it, stretch it out, we'll worry about it later. I never thought that made sense, and a lot of people now don't. We funded, the youth center. It was initially going to be bonded to the tune of about $4 million.
All cash.
That's been paid off. There's a $1 million bond still authorized, which we're going to pay off at this annual town meeting. So there's no bonding. There's no interest on that project at all, which is amazing. So that's the kind of thing that you have to do to reduce your long-term costs.
Well, quite honestly, you see a lot of infighting and a lot of this, arguments and that kind of stuff. But as a result of that dialogue, Milford is in the place it's in today.
Sure.
If everybody said, yeah, let's do it, yeah, let's do it, yeah, let's do it, then you wouldn't have the checks and balances you have, and
Yeah,
that's really working well.
I actually wonder if everybody agrees on everything. I keep waiting for something to break. I think regardless of whether you're the 2 or the 1 on the board's vote, I think the discussions are very healthy.
Yeah.
Because when you finally agree to do something, and I always tell people who think, oh, they're fighting again, and I said, well, how about when they vote unanimously? It's a pretty good way of hashing out all the arguments or not moving somewhere.
A lot of boards just go along to get along, and that's not a good thing. That argument, that dialogue, that debate is critical to show that everybody is bringing to the table ideas. If everybody says, yeah, let's do it, then the voter begins to wonder on whether or not you're really doing anything. You're just sitting there.
Yeah, and I think the key is, like you said, you've got to have progress. You've got to be doing things.
Right.
So, if it's a 2-to-1 vote and I'm on the short end of that vote, but something is getting done, whether it's, a truck being bought or a truck being not bought and the money goes, whatever it is, you're making progress, you're going forward, you're doing things. If you're arguing about petty things and there's no activity at all by your government, then that's a disservice.
And one of the things, my first day as a selectman, one of the things that was the guy who had been a selectman since the beginning of time told me, he said, the key is to be able to have that debate and then walk out of the room and then go on to the next one.
Sure.
Don't carry that bag along,
Absolutely.
get on the next one. And that's the critical thing. As long as you can have those debates and move on to the next issue and start on a clean table, your government is working properly.
And I don't have any trouble with that, and maybe that's an outgrowth of my job. As a lawyer, you have to do that. The one thing is, you're going to know where I'm coming from. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to be frank with you, and I'm going to tell you what I think, and that's it. But, I mean, now we move on.
And you know, maybe it's your legal training, but you are a very skilled debater at town meetings.
Oh.
I mean, when you get up, you know, I don't want to contrast you with other people getting up with pads of paper and arguing for 2 hours against something, but when you get up, you make an argument like a lawyer does in, you know, the TV courtrooms we see.
Oh, wow.
You get up, you make an argument,
Yeah.
and it's got facts with it, and it's there, and you're known for that. I mean,
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the key is to be brief. I think the key is to know your audience, know exactly what they consider to be important. Not necessarily what I think is important. It's what they consider important, the questions that they may have, and I need to address those questions.
but I've also heard it said you don't attract many opponents in running against you for selectmen because they're afraid of your very formidable opponent, that you're a skilled debater.
Well,
You're going to find the hole in their argument and run with it.
you know, the thing is, I mean, if someone wants to run, you know, for my seat, that's fine. That's everyone's prerogative. Everyone has a right to run for office, and that's no problem. But, you know, if you're going to run against me, be prepared to work. Be prepared to work. That's all I can say, because it's not going to be easy. And if you want to convince people that you can do a better job than I, that's fine. Good luck to you. But be prepared to work.
Now, I know it's early. We're taping this in mid-October. Any thoughts on whether you're going to run for another term?
I don't know. I mean, traditionally we get through the holidays, and
I know. I said it's early.
Yeah,
That's
no,
always,
yeah.
January is the time for that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll talk to my wife. Unfortunately, our kids aren't really around anymore. They're off doing their own thing. So I'll talk to my wife, and I mean, you know, probably if it makes sense, if I can contribute to the community, if there's something that I feel I can help out with the town, then we'll stay involved. If not, we'll notice, and but there'll be plenty of time. Traditionally January, I think, is when people make decisions going forward.
But you would have expected that question.
I expect any question with Kevin.
Yeah.
He's very prepared.
Yeah.
I told you last night what we'd be asking was the new majority on the board,
Yeah.
what your goals and objectives are, and
Yeah.
I've kind of asked those questions, so.
Well, that's important. I mean, those are fair questions, and everybody watches this is going to say, well, at least someone asked that question.
Sure.
That's always
sure.
a question that sits there. Nobody's afraid to
I
ask.
do have one.
Yeah.
You're known for working on big projects, the Draper Memorial Park restoration, the senior center, community fields, now the youth center. Any one you're prouder of than the others, or do you all look at them and go, they were all good things to do that were needed?
It's like asking you which one of your children do you like best. Each one of them I attacked, or I had the challenge at a different stage in my life. Each one had its own unique challenges. Each one was a very gratifying and learning experience for me. Each one brought me into contact with different people, some who I've become friends with for continuously. But the thing that I think keeps me going and involved in the town is the gratification to see how these structures serve the town and the people in the town of Milford. I mean, you remember the senior center that we had before. It was embarrassing. And we had a lot of opposition. Well, what do you got? You don't need to build a new senior center. They only have seven parking spaces at the existing one. It doesn't get used. It's never going to get used. I mean, that's been a tremendous structure. Seniors go there. There's all kinds of programs. So to me,
people from all over the state come and look at it.
That's what's very gratifying to see, that I had a part in putting that there, which. That was, I mean, if you remember, that was almost a condemned part of town.
Yes.
That was where the shoe factory burned down.
There was a shoe factory. It was contaminated soil. So as part of the project, we had to clean up the contaminated soil, which is about $400,000. They started saying the senior center is costing too much money. I said, well, it's not the senior center.
It's the remuneration.
We're cleaning this contaminated soil.
Right.
And when this goes in that part of town, you're going to see a development in that part of town. It's going to, like throwing a rock in the pond, it's going to spread
Right.
out, and you're going to see development in that area of town. And now that area of town, you know, I think the Blair House that came in with their
Right.
assisted living, it really capped it off. It's a very vibrant part of the town, which, I mean, you remember what it was. I mean, you had the bar room down at the end there. It was an area.
Well, I remember in the late
people didn't wanna
70s, I
go.
would not feel comfortable walking from Main Street down to the Bow Street Union without a
yeah.
little muscle
Well,
behind me.
I think the significant thing, and it goes to generally Milford and to some extent outside the abutting towns, is one of the big complaints in the United States is reinvestment in the infrastructure.
Yes.
The towns, communities, the states, the country is not reinvesting in the infrastructure. And it's nice to see a community like Milford reinvesting in that infrastructure and bringing those buildings online, or improving them, or reconstructing them, or building new, so it keeps that infrastructure consistent with the times, rather than let it fall apart.
Right, right.
And I think that shows in a large part the leadership in a community and the cooperation between the FinCom, the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, all the departments in town cooperating and say, yeah, we need to move the agenda forward.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen accidentally.
Yeah.
Even the Kmart Plaza is being renovated.
Right.
Well, it is, you know, and again, that's private, but, you know.
Private, but the owner, the New York-based owners of the plaza, I found fascinating, paid Kmart $3 million to get out of town,
Yes.
so they could renovate the
Right,
plaza.
they had to buy out of the lease.
They bought
Buy out of the
they had a
lease.
50-year lease, and
Right.
he said, and they bought them out. They
Right.
literally said, well, Kmart's in financial trouble. They're doing that in a lot of places, but they were the obstacle to
Right.
brightening up that plaza.
Right.
And that's a positive statement to the town of Milford, is that
Right.
business or companies want to reinvest and are willing to take a risk and invest even a little more money to make that happen.
Sure.
to move
And they're
an
sitting
agenda.
waiting for the right companies to come in. They're
So
not
I
just
think it's
leasing to
very positive.
Joe's Auto
Yeah.
Parts.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, are there any plans, long-term, short-term, to rejuvenate the center of town?
Well, I mean, you know, and that goes back to, I guess, one of Kevin's questions. I mean, that's really one of the things that I would like to try to push along a little bit during this chairmanship year. To start things off, I asked our town administrator to get back into the community development block game, and I think he's reaching out to Mendon and Upton to see if we could partner and submit a joint application to try to get back into that cycle. I also asked the town engineer, the planning department, the police department to give me an inventory of parking in the Main Street area. And we got back a report that targeted some areas that could be taken to expand the parking areas that we have. And then also the planning board did have an article a few years back to try to add a targeted amount of residential
Right.
housing on some of the upper levels downtown. So, I mean, I think all of those, I think in conjunction packaged, could do more to try to enrich downtown. I mean, I don't want to say revitalize downtown.
No.
Because it's not really as abandoned as people think it is. And I'm probably on downtown more than anybody else in town hall. I mean, I work there. I'm walking down Main Street all the time, so I see it. I think these kinds of things put together long-term will help the growth. I think you've got to do something meaningful for the
Right.
business owners. Parking is the #1 concern, so we have to do everything we can to try to
Improve that,
maximize
right.
parking. I haven't really had, you know, the time to try to focus on that, push it. I don't get the sense that, you know, the rest of the board is enthused about, you know, some of those proposals. So it's something that I've kind of laid out, but I really haven't had a chance to push it forward.